In the first talk, we opened the door to the inner world, the place within us that quietly shapes everything we experience. This second talk begins where that door leads, because the moment we turn inward, one truth begins to emerge. We're not trapped by our lives. We're trapped by the mind's version of our lives. This talk is about seeing through that filter, about noticing what the mind creates and what remains when the mind grows quiet. Let's continue. What if the life you're living right now is only a filtered version of reality? And what if awakening begins the moment you recognize the filter? The human mind is extraordinary. It evolved to help us survive, to analyze, to remember, to predict. But it was never designed to reveal the deeper nature of who we are. Instead, it quietly builds the world we experience. Imagine a clear light shining through layers of colored glass. The light itself is pure. The colored glass represents the filters of the mind: belief, memory, fear, desire, and everything we've come to identify as me. The light never changes, only the glass does. Yet over time, the glass becomes so intricate, so convincing, that we begin to mistake the colors for reality itself. Our intelligence doesn't simply help us understand the world, it interprets it. It builds an immersive inner world so complete that we rarely question it. We simply assume that what we think is what is. But beneath every thought, beneath every emotion, beneath every identity, there is something quieter: awareness. Not produced by thought, but present before thought. When we begin to notice that difference, something shifts. We realize that much of what disturbs us does not come directly from life. It comes from the mind's interpretation of life. The body experiences pain, that is real, but the mind often carries that pain long after the moment has passed. As we move through life, it's almost as though the colored glass slowly begins to thin. Thought loses some of its authority. Awareness becomes easier to recognize. We begin to discover moments of stillness, where the mind is no longer telling us who we are. This rarely happens all at once. It unfolds quietly, gradually, often without us even noticing. And as it does, the same questions begin to appear. Who are we? Where are we going? And where do we truly wish to be? To explore those questions honestly, we first have to recognize the mind's greatest delusion: the belief that thinking is who we are. When I look at nature, I feel its connectedness everywhere. There is a quiet harmony in it, a kind of coherence that doesn't need explanation or belief. When I look within myself, I notice something equally quiet. My awareness today feels different from what it was when I was younger. What mattered then matters differently now. The things that once pulled me outward now pull me inward. It isn't that life has changed, it's the way I meet life has changed. When I look around, I see people living almost entirely through the self. And I can feel the weight that creates. A mind wrapped tightly around itself naturally becomes defensive, reactive, overwhelmed. But I also meet people who seem different. People who move through life more gently, more lightly, as though they've begun to set that burden of self down. And when that happens, something quieter appears. A peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. I've noticed the same movement within myself. Whenever I become attached to thoughts, to emotions, to possessions, or to the stories my mind creates, something contracts. The peace I'm looking for slips quietly out of my reach. But the moment I let go, even a little, something opens again. It's never dramatic, it's never loud, but it's deeply freeing. As though awareness naturally expands when the self loosens its grip. As I've grown older, I've realized something I never expected. I'm more at peace, even if I'm not as happy as I once was. Happiness has become quieter, less important. Peace has become steadier, deeper. I've also noticed something else. Whenever I place myself at the center of my mental world, everything feels personal. Everything feels unfair. The mind begins asking, why me? But the moment the center shifts from self to selflessness, my whole experience changes. People become easier to understand. Life becomes gentler. Peace, I found, doesn't come from adding more to the self. It comes from asking less of it. Inside, I still feel young. My body grows older, but the awareness behind all of this doesn't seem to age at all. It simply is. And the more I become aware of that, the more free will begins to feel less like making decisions, and more like responding to a quiet pull, drawing me towards greater selflessness. In moments of real stillness, I sometimes sense something spacious, something that extends far beyond the boundaries of thought. And so the questions remain. Who are we? Where are we going? And where do we truly wish to be? When I turn to those questions honestly, one thing becomes increasingly clear. Every answer seems to depend on how tightly I cling to the self. When I look at nature, I see instinct, a quiet intelligence that doesn't need thought. When I look at humanity, I see intuition, a quieter guidance that appears only when the mind finally becomes still enough to hear it. And when I look within, the answer feels surprisingly simple. I am consciousness, not intelligence. Intelligence is the tool. Consciousness is the field in which it appears. Everything I've shared in this talk is simply an observation, not something I've asked you to believe, only something I've noticed by paying attention. And perhaps that's where every inward journey truly begins. Not with certainty, but with observation. Because when the filters begin to fall away, we discover something quietly extraordinary. We were never really searching for answers. We were searching for ourselves all along.